Sometimes the most tragic stories are told not in words, but in cold arithmetic. The story of Rudy Lewis, the golden voice of the Drifters, is a heartbreaking example. His career was built on big numbers, millions of records sold, and two timeless top 10 hits. In 1964, he was poised to record a third that would have cemented his legend, but his fate would be calculated by two smaller, more devastating figures. He was 27 years old and just one single night away from recording Under the Boardwalk, what would become one of the biggest hits of the era, when he was found dead of an overdose in a lonely hotel room. This is the story behind those numbers, a story of the secret torment that led to a final, fatal calculation, and the heartbreaking price paid by one of music's most hopeful voices. The torment, the price, the fatal calculation, they are all woven into the mystery of his passing. But to truly understand the soulful explosion that was Rudy Lewis, you must first immerse yourself in the world that forged him. He was born Charles Rudolph Harrell on August 23, 1936, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This was not the historic Philadelphia of the Liberty Bell, but the working class, predominantly black neighborhoods of North and West Philadelphia. This community, forged by the Great Migration, was built by countless families, including Rudy's, who had journeyed from the oppressive rural South to the industrial North in search of factory jobs and a measure of dignity they had long been denied. Rudy grew up in a world of tightly packed row houses, where the church was the absolute center of gravity for the community. In a deeply segregated America where public spaces were often hostile and opportunities were limited, the black church was a sanctuary in every sense of the word. It was the social club, the community center, and most importantly, the grand concert hall where the soul of the community found its most powerful and authentic voice. The soundtrack to this entire world was gospel music. It was not simply a genre to be consumed, but a lifeline, a living form of communication that expressed the full spectrum of human experience. It was found in the joyous, hand-clapping shouts of celebration, the mournful moans of sorrow, and the soaring hymns of deliverance that promised a better world. Gospel was the language of survival, transforming pain into something transcendent through faith and harmony. This was the air that Rudy Lewis breathed from his first days. It was the very pulse of his neighborhood and the foundation of the artist he would become. As a young boy, he absorbed the complex rhythms, the intricate call and response harmonies, and the raw, unvarnished emotion of gospel, not as a musical form to be studied, but as the natural language of his people. It was simply the way you expressed what was in your heart. Like so many children in his neighborhood, he joined the local church choir. It was here, standing shoulder to shoulder with his peers in a stuffy, oversized choir robe, that he first discovered the unique and formidable power of his own voice. It was a voice that, even at a young age, possessed a natural, rich warmth and a soulful texture that was beyond his years. It could blend seamlessly and intuitively into a harmony, adding richness and depth. But when called upon to stand alone to take the lead on a verse, it had a quiet power that could command the rapt attention of the entire congregation. In that church choir, Rudy didn't just learn how to sing scales and hit notes, he learned the sacred and powerful art of how to testify. He learned that the true power of a song lay not in its technical perfection, but in the genuine, unfeigned emotion that the singer poured into every single word. He learned how to channel the collective feeling of the room, to take the energy of the congregation and reflect it back, magnified. He learned how to build a song from a quiet, introspective prayer whispered into the microphone to a soaring, ecstatic declaration that could lift people out of their seats and set their souls on fire. This experience shaped his entire artistic DNA. The passion, the intimate interplay with an audience, the feeling of being a vessel for a spiritual energy larger than himself, it all became a fundamental part of his musical identity. The church was his first stage, his first conservatory, and the sacred ground that gave him the expressive tools he would use for the rest of his tragically short life, whether he was singing about his Savior or about a girl he met on a Saturday night. As the 1950s dawned, the cultural landscape of America was beginning to shift in profound and irreversible ways. The tremors of a youthquake were being felt across the nation, and its soundtrack was the electrifying, often controversial, new sounds of rhythm and blues and rock and roll. For a supremely talented young singer like Rudy Lewis, whose voice had been honed and polished in the demanding world of the Philadelphia church choirs, the world of professional gospel music offered a legitimate and respectable path to a life beyond the factory floor or the shipyard. It was a chance to take the God-given talent he had so carefully nurtured and share it with a wider world, to make a living doing the thing he loved most. Sometime in the mid-1950s, he took a momentous leap of faith. He successfully auditioned for a place in one of the most celebrated, glamorous, and influential gospel groups in American history, the Clara Ward Singers. To join the Clara Ward Singers in the 1950s was the gospel equivalent of being called up to the major leagues. They were, quite simply, royalty. Led by the dynamic, flamboyant, and brilliant singer, pianist, and businesswoman Clara Ward, this group had transcended the traditional church circuit to become bona fide national stars. They performed at the Newport Jazz Festival, at Radio City Music Hall, and even in the glitzy showrooms of Las Vegas. They were famous for their powerful, intricate harmonies, their impeccable high-energy showmanship, and their glamorous presentation. At a time when many gospel groups still performed in simple, unadorned choir robes, the Clara Ward Singers took to the stage in dazzling, custom-made gowns, elaborate hairstyles, and sparkling jewelry. They brought a level of theatricality and glamour to gospel music that was unprecedented, and at times even controversial among the more conservative churchgoers. For Rudy, a young man from the row houses of Northeast Philadelphia, stepping into this world was a transformative, head-spinning experience. It plucked him from the familiar local community of his childhood and placed him onto the biggest stages in the nation. It was an entirely new level of professionalism, pressure, and artistry. What made Rudy's position within the group particularly unique was the fact that he was one of the very few male singers in an ensemble celebrated for its powerful and distinct female vocalists. His warm, resonant baritone was not meant to overpower, but to complement and enrich the group's sound. It provided a crucial, soulful counterpoint to the soaring sopranos of Marion Williams and the gritty powerhouse altos of the other women. His voice added a foundational layer of masculine strength and deep soulful feeling to their sound, a sonic texture that set the Clara Ward Singers apart from their contemporaries. He wasn't just another voice in the choir. His presence was a key ingredient in their unique and captivating formula. Life on the road with the group was a grueling but invaluable education in the realities of being a professional musician. They traveled relentlessly on what was known as the Gospel Highway, a sprawling, informal network of churches, auditoriums, and concert halls that welcomed Black performers across a still fiercely segregated America. Rudy experienced the stark and often jarring contradictions of this life firsthand. One night they would be performing for an adoring, integrated audience in a grand theater in a northern city like New York or Chicago, staying in a comfortable hotel and being treated like the stars they were. The very next day, they might be in the Deep South facing the daily slights and humiliations of Jim Crow laws, unable to eat in certain restaurants or stay in certain hotels, relying on the parallel network of Black-owned businesses and the generous hospitality of local church members for their safety, lodging, and sustenance. This constant navigation of a nation at war with itself was a heavy burden, but it also instilled a deep sense of resilience and a profound understanding of the world beyond the stage. This constant touring, however, was where Rudy truly honed his craft from a raw talent into a consummate professional. He learned about discipline, about the incredible physical and mental stamina required to deliver a powerful, emotionally draining performance night after night, city after city. He perfected his stage presence, learning how to connect with an audience of thousands with the same intimacy and directness he had used with the congregation of his childhood church. Clara Ward herself became a crucial mentor figure for the young singer. She was more than just a band leader. She was a master of musical interpretation and emotional dynamics, a savvy businesswoman who understood the art of performance as well as anyone in the industry. She saw the raw, natural talent in Rudy and taught him how to refine it, how to control the incredible instrument he possessed. She pushed him to dig deeper into the meaning of a lyric, to find the emotional core of a song and inhabit it so completely that it became his own story. He learned from her that the quietest, most vulnerable note, delivered with genuine, unforced feeling, could often be more powerful and heart-stopping than the loudest, most glorious shout. This nuanced understanding of emotional delivery, the ability to convey immense feeling with subtle control, would become a hallmark of his later work with the Drifters, particularly on their heartbreakingly beautiful ballads. His time with the Clara Ward singers gave him the polish, the professionalism, and the artistic depth to become more than just a great singer. It prepared him to become a true and compelling artist. He had seen the nation, from its grandest concert halls to its most segregated back roads. He had learned from a master of the craft, and he had established himself as a respected voice in the world of professional gospel. But as the decade drew to a close, a different kind of music was beginning to call to him, a siren song that was growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. It was the secular sound of rhythm and blues, a sound that was exploding on the radio and in the jukeboxes across the country. It was a sound that took the sacred passion of gospel and applied it to earthly themes of love, romance, heartbreak, and Saturday night dances. For a young gospel singer like Rudy Lewis, the siren song of R&B was not a temptation. It was a schism. It was the sound of a world that promised earthly rewards for a spiritual gift, a devil's bargain offered in three-part harmony. The gospel highway, though spiritually fulfilling, was a life of relentless travel and modest pay, and Rudy began to question if there was something more. As the 1960s began, the electrifying sound of rhythm and blues became the undeniable soundtrack of young America. Rudy saw the blueprint for success in artists who had made a similar leap. Sam Cooke provided the template, leaving the soul stirrers to become a beloved pop idol, proving a crossover was possible without losing one's soul. Meanwhile, Ray Charles was audaciously blending gospel's ecstatic vocals with secular themes of love and heartbreak, effectively inventing soul music, while performers like Jackie Wilson brought an electrifying sermon-like energy to the stage. This new music was exciting, sophisticated, and offered a level of fame and security that was almost unimaginable in the gospel world. For Rudy, the decision to leave the Clara Ward singers and the sacred world of gospel was not a simple career change, it was a profound soul-searching crossroads. In the eyes of many in his deeply religious community, to sing secular music was to turn one's back on God. R&B was often dismissed with a scornful whisper as the devil's music, a profane imitation of a sacred art form, using the tools of the church to sing about the temptations of the flesh. To make this leap was to risk censure and ostracism from the very community that had nurtured him, to trade the certainty and spiritual safety of the church pew for the fickle, often predatory, world of the mainstream music industry. It was a choice between continuing a life of perceived spiritual purpose and pursuing a new one of personal and artistic ambition. In 1960, armed with a voice that had been polished to perfection, but a future that was entirely uncertain, Rudy Lewis made his choice. He respectfully parted ways with Clara Ward, left the gospel highway behind, and set his sights on a new destination, the bright, alluring, and dangerous lights of Broadway. His journey led him into the competitive world of professional R&B, an orbit centered on legendary venues like Philadelphia's Uptown Theater. The Uptown was more than just a stage. It was a cornerstone of black entertainment in America, a magnificent Art Deco palace where talent was discovered and legends were made. To succeed, there was to breathe the same air as Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, and James Brown. It was in this high-stakes environment that a man who held the keys to a kingdom, the sharp and powerful music executive George Treadwell, was conducting a desperate search. Treadwell was the manager, and more importantly, the legal owner of the brand known as the Drifters, and his multi-million-dollar brand was in a state of crisis. The Drifters were at that moment one of the most successful vocal groups in the world, a well-oiled hit-making machine with a string of iconic genre-defining records like There Goes My Baby, This Magic Moment, and Save the Last Dance for Me. But they had just lost their most valuable and irreplaceable asset. Their lead singer, the impossibly smooth and charismatic Benny King, had clashed with Treadwell over royalties and had departed for what would become a legendary solo career, leaving a gaping void at the very center of the group that seemed impossible to fill. For Treadwell, this was a business emergency of the highest order. The Drifters were a valuable commodity, a name that guaranteed record sales and sold-out shows. He had famously fired the entire original group years earlier and replaced them, proving that for him, the brand was more important than the individuals. He now needed to find a new lead singer, and he needed to do it fast. He wasn't looking for a cheap imitation of Benny King. He was looking for a new star, a voice with the power, the charisma, and the unique identity to carry the group into its next chapter and keep the hits coming. Amidst the sea of talented singers trying to make their name, the powerful, gospel-honed voice of Rudy Lewis began to generate a buzz. When word of this young singer reached the ears of music executive George Treadwell, he knew he had found his solution. The moment Treadwell heard Rudy's voice, the search was over. What poured out was not the polished, polite pop of his contemporaries, but something deeper, richer, and infinitely more authentic. It was the sound of Sunday morning testimony, and Rudy didn't just sing the notes, he inhabited them, living inside each word. His phrasing carried the raw, emotional cadence of a gospel sermon. Yet Treadwell also heard a sophisticated melodic control that was perfect for the pop charts. It was a voice that held both vulnerability and power, one that could break a heart on a ballad and then command a dance floor on an up-tempo track. Treadwell knew immediately this was not merely a replacement for Benny King. This was the future of the Drifters. The offer was made, and Rudy's life was irrevocably changed. In a single afternoon, he had gone from an unemployed former gospel singer facing an uncertain future to the new lead vocalist for one of the biggest R&B groups on the planet. He was immediately swept up into a new world, a whirlwind of contracts, rehearsals, and travel, a world centered around a single mythical address in New York City, 1619 Broadway, the Brill Building. The Brill Building and its neighboring properties like 1650 Broadway was the undisputed epicenter of the American music industry, a vertical assembly line of pop genius. Its floors were filled with a warren of tiny, soundproofed cubicles, each one containing little more than an upright piano, a perpetually full ashtray, and a team of some of the most brilliant and competitive young songwriters in history. This was the world of Carole King and Jerry Goffin, of Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, of Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil. Day in and day out, in a fever of creative energy, they crafted perfectly constructed, emotionally resonant 3-minute pop songs for the biggest stars of the day. It was a world of intense competition, of professional precision, and of commercial calculation. For Rudy, who came from the organic, improvisational, and spiritually driven world of the gospel church, where songs were often stretched out, rearranged, and reborn in the heat of a live performance, stepping into the Brill Building was like landing on another planet. His new job was to be the final, crucial component in this assembly line, to take these meticulously crafted pop songs, which often came with lush, complex string arrangements already written, and breathe a human, soulful life into them. It was a fusion that on paper seemed unlikely to work, the spontaneous passion of the church meeting the calculated precision of the factory. But in practice, it would create pure, unadulterated magic. Stepping into the lead singer role for a group as established and successful as the Drifters would have been an intimidating task for anyone, let alone following in the footsteps of a beloved and iconic figure like Ben E. King. The existing members of the group, veterans like Charlie Thomas, Doc Green, and Else Barry Hobbs, were seasoned professionals who had seen singers come and go. They were initially skeptical of this new, quiet singer from the world of gospel. But Rudy's undeniable world-class talent and his quiet, unassuming, and gentle nature quickly won them over. His first recording sessions with the group in late 1960 and early 1961 were a crucial test, a chance to see if the magic Treadwell had heard in the audition could be captured on magnetic tape. The sessions were overseen by the legendary writer-producer duo of Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, two white Jewish men from opposite coasts who somehow possessed a profound and intuitive understanding of black music. They were geniuses of the recording studio, known for their innovative production techniques, their witty, story-driven lyrics, and their ability to craft mini-dramas within the confines of a pop song. For Rudy, this was an entirely new way of working. In the gospel world, a recording session was often about capturing the spontaneous, raw energy of a live performance. In the highly controlled world of Lieber and Stoller, it was a precise, meticulous process of building a song layer by layer, take after take, searching for the perfect alchemy of voice, instrument, and arrangement. His first major hit single with the group was Sweets for My Sweet, where you can hear him finding his footing, navigating this new landscape. The gospel influence is there, expertly woven into the pop fabric. It's in the soulful curl of a note at the end of a phrase, the way he invests a lyric with a sense of pleading vulnerability that feels utterly real and deeply personal. When he sings, "Please stay, don't go away," it isn't just a romantic plea. It's a prayer, a piece of testimony delivered with a heartbreaking sincerity. He wasn't just singing about love, he was testifying about it. These records were successful, cracking the top 40 and proving to the world, and more importantly to the record label, that the Drifters could not only survive, but thrive after Benny King. But it was the following year, in 1962, that Rudy Lewis would record the song that truly defined his legacy, a song that would elevate him from a successful replacement to an immortal voice and launch the Drifters into an even higher orbit of stardom. The song was Up on the Roof, a masterpiece of urban poetry penned by the brilliant husband and wife team of Carole King and Jerry Goffin. The song was, in its own quiet way, a revolution. It captured a universal feeling, the primal human desire to escape the noise, the stress, and the pressures of the world, and set it against the specific unglamorous backdrop of a gritty working-class city. The lyrics were simple, elegant, and deeply resonant. It was a song about finding a private paradise, a peaceful sanctuary, not on a tropical island or a remote mountaintop, but on the humble, tar-papered roof of a tenement building. It was a democratic dream, an escape accessible to anyone who could climb a flight of stairs. The recording session for Up on the Roof was one of those rare, magical moments where all the elements of a perfect record came together in sublime harmony. The arrangement by Lieber and Stoller was a work of genius, with a gentle swaying rhythm and a soaring, cinematic string section that perfectly mimicked the feeling of ascending toward the sky. But it was Rudy's vocal performance that elevated the song from a great pop tune to an immortal classic. He sang it with a breathtaking sense of gentle, yearning optimism. There was no gospel shouting, no raw, guttural cries. Instead, he drew on the lessons of emotional dynamics he had so carefully absorbed from his years on the gospel highway. His delivery was soft, intimate, and filled with a profound sense of peace and contentment. When he sang the central, transcendent lyric, "On the roof it's peaceful as can be, and there the world below can't bother me," his voice was a balm, a comforting whisper that made you believe him completely, that made you feel the cool night air on your skin. It was a performance of stunning nuance and control, a masterclass in understated emotion. The record was a massive major U.S. hit. In the UK, Kenny Lynch's cover version carried the song into the top 10. It was a personal and professional triumph that cemented Rudy Lewis as the definitive voice of the Drifters' new era. He was no longer in the shadow of Benny King. He was casting a brilliant shadow, all his own. He followed this monumental success in 1963 with another track that would become an anthem of a different, more earthbound sort, On Broadway. This was not a gentle escape into the heavens. It was a gritty, theatrical declaration of ambition on the unforgiving streets of New York City. Co-written by a powerhouse team that included Barry Mann, Cynthia Weil, and Lieber and Stoller. The song was a mini-drama set to music, the story of a hopeful musician with holes in his shoes and a guitar in his hand, determined to make his name in a city that eats young dreamers for breakfast. For this song, Rudy summoned a completely different part of his artistic arsenal. He became an actor, a storyteller, inhabiting the character of the struggling artist. His performance was a tour de force, filled with a potent mix of desperation and defiant pride. You can hear the hunger and the exhaustion in his voice when he sings, "They say the neon lights are bright on Broadway," and the steely, unwavering resolve when he declares, "But I won't quit till I'm a star on Broadway." It was another top 10 smash hit, a record that showcased his incredible versatility. He was not just a tender balladeer, he was a dramatic interpreter of song, capable of conveying a novel's worth of emotion in under 3 minutes. Over the course of 3 short, brilliant years, Rudy Lewis had become the soul and the sound of the Drifters. He had led them to the top of the charts again and again, his voice becoming a familiar and beloved presence on the radio waves across the world. He was living a life of sharp suits, sold-out concerts, and television appearances. On the surface, he had achieved the very dream that had led him away from the gospel highway. He was a star. But behind the curtain of fame, behind the warm smile and the impossibly soulful voice, a series of silent, desperate, and dangerous battles were raging within him, battles that no one, outside of a very small and trusted circle, could see. By 1963, Rudy Lewis was, by every external metric, a resounding success. He was the handsome, charismatic frontman of one of the most popular and critically respected singing groups in the world. He traveled the country and the world in a style he could have only dreamed of as a boy in Philadelphia. He performed on national television, his smooth image broadcast into millions of American living rooms. He heard his own voice pouring out of radios from coast to coast, a constant and comforting presence on the airwaves. The sophisticated urban romance that he so expertly conveyed in his music had become the soundtrack for a generation of young dreamers, the background music for first dates, high school dances, and quiet moments of contemplation on fire escapes and tenement rooftops. But this polished, confident image, the one presented to the world on album, covers, and on the stage of the Apollo Theater, was a masterful and exhausting performance. It was a carefully constructed mask that hid a private reality of deepening turmoil, profound isolation, and a pain so immense it threatened to consume him whole. The very pressures that came with his hard-won success were systematically and cruelly dismantling the sensitive man behind the microphone. The life of a touring musician in the early 1960s was a grueling, disorienting existence, a relentless cycle of long, sleepless bus rides, anonymous hotel rooms, and fleeting moments of on-stage adoration, followed by the deafening silence of the after-show emptiness. It was a life lived out of a suitcase, divorced from the normal rhythms of home, family, and community. For Black artists like the Drifters, these inherent pressures were magnified tenfold by the ugly, persistent realities of a deeply segregated America. While they were bona fide stars in the recording studio and on the stages of the North, the moment their tour bus crossed the Mason-Dixon line, they were reminded in 1,000 humiliating ways that their fame meant little. In many parts of the country, they were still subject to the daily indignities of Jim Crow. They could be the headlining act, their name in bright lights on the marquee, and still be forced to enter the venue through a back door, past the kitchens and the garbage bins. They were frequently denied service in restaurants and diners, and finding lodging was a nightly challenge, forcing them to rely on a network of Black-owned boarding houses or the kindness of strangers, as most hotels were for whites only. This constant state of being othered, the psychological grind of navigating a hostile landscape, took a heavy toll. It was more than just an inconvenience. It was a source of constant low-grade trauma, a reminder that no matter how beautifully you sang or how many records you sold, a large part of the country still saw you as less than human. This unending stress, combined with the physical exhaustion of the road and the emotional loneliness of being utterly disconnected from any semblance of a normal life, created an environment that was tragically ripe for self-destruction. It was in this high-pressure crucible that Rudy's private demons began to take hold and tighten their grip. According to Billy Vera's 1996 liner notes for the Drifters anthology, Rudy likely struggled with a heroin addiction, a dark and all-consuming secret that he guarded ferociously from the outside world. In the shadowy corners of the jazz and R&B worlds of that era, heroin was not a glamorous party drug. It was often grimly referred to as musician's fuel, a potent, dangerous, and tragically effective form of self-medication. It was a chemical blanket that could temporarily numb the acute feelings of anxiety before a show, the bone-deep weariness after it, the crushing loneliness of a hotel room in a strange town, and the simmering rage of 1,000 racial slights. For Rudy, a man who was described by those who knew him as naturally introverted, gentle, and deeply sensitive, the drug likely offered a desperately needed escape from the constant, unrelenting pressure to be on, to be the charming, confident star everyone expected him to be, night after night. It was a perilous refuge, a solution that was rapidly becoming more destructive and isolating than the problems it was meant to solve. His internal turmoil also manifested in other deeply connected ways. Vera's account suggests he struggled with a binge-eating disorder, a condition rooted in the same complex web of emotional distress, anxiety, and depression that fueled his addiction. Food, like heroin, became another way to cope, another way to temporarily fill the void and soothe the pain. His weight began to fluctuate dramatically, and this ongoing, visible battle with his physical self added another heavy layer of shame and a terrifying feeling of being completely out of control of his own life. In the image-conscious world of pop music, where the handsome faces on the album cover were a key part of the product, this was more than a personal issue. It was a professional liability, a visible sign of the invisible chaos that was raging within him. But the deepest, the darkest, and the most isolating of all his struggles was the one he could never, ever speak about, not even to his closest friends. Vera suggested that Rudy Lewis was a closeted gay man at a time in American history when that identity was not just a social taboo, but was officially classified as a mental illness by the psychiatric establishment, was criminalized by sodomy laws in nearly every state, and was condemned as a profound moral failing by the very church that had given him his voice. It is almost impossible for us today to overstate the immense suffocating danger and the crushing psychological burden of being a closeted gay man in the America of the early 1960s. This was the era just after the Lavender Scare, a time of intense state-sponsored persecution where thousands of gay people were fired from government jobs, publicly shamed, and treated as national security risks. The world was brutally, unapologetically homophobic, and for a black man in the public eye, an artist whose entire brand was built on singing romantic, often vulnerable ballads to a largely female fan base, exposure would have meant instantaneous and irreversible ruin. There would be no second chances. It would have been, without exaggeration, career suicide. He was therefore forced to live a precarious and exhausting double life. Every interaction, every friendship, every interview fraught with the terrifying possibility of a slip-up, a misinterpreted gesture, a rumor that could catch fire and burn his entire world to the ground. The constant vigilance, the need to perform a role of carefully curated masculinity not just on stage but in every waking moment of his life, was a soul-crushing burden. His very existence was a painful contradiction. He was celebrated as the voice of love and romantic connection for millions of people, yet he was denied the simple fundamental human right to love openly and honestly himself, to build a life with a partner without fear of prison, public disgrace, or violence. This secret also placed him in direct and painful conflict with his own past. His entire artistic identity, the very essence of his soulful voice, was forged in the gospel church. But that same institution, the source of his greatest gift, was at the time deeply and vocally conservative on matters of sexuality. This would have added a profound layer of internal spiritual conflict, a sense of guilt and damnation layered on top of his social and professional fears. He was a man caught in an impossible, agonizing trap, torn between the faith that had shaped his soul, the identity that was his unchangeable truth, and the career that was the fulfillment of his lifelong dream. These three pressures were not separate demons. They were a single, self-sustaining hydra. The shame of his hidden life fed the need for the needle's oblivion. The needle's oblivion fueled the chaos of his physical decline, and the decline deepened the shame. It was a perfect, silent, and fatal machine of self-destruction. The stress, fear, and shame of his hidden life fueled his depression and his desperate desire to escape, an escape he found in the temporary oblivion of drugs and food. But the drug use and the subsequent health problems and weight gain only increased his feelings of guilt, self-loathing, and his fear of exposure, which in turn deepened his depression and intensified his need to numb the pain. He was trapped in a silent, ever-accelerating, vicious cycle, and he was enduring it completely, terrifyingly alone, even when he was on a stage in front of thousands of adoring fans. The spring of 1964 should have been a time of immense optimism. The Under the Boardwalk session was booked. This was it, the song that would cement his legacy, the coronation he had worked for his entire life. The countdown had begun. But as Rudy prepared to sing about an idyllic escape, he was trapped in a private reality from which he could find no exit. He was at the absolute peak of his fame, but secretly, he was at his breaking point. The facade was cracking, and the clock was running out. On the evening of May 20th, the night before the scheduled recording session, Rudy Lewis retired to his hotel room in Harlem. It was not one of the glamorous midtown hotels where the band might stay for a press junket, but a more anonymous place, a place where the shadows of his private life could exist away from the relentless glare of the spotlight. The exact events of that night will forever remain a mystery, lost to the silence of that lonely room. But it is not hard to imagine the state of his mind. He was likely exhausted from the road, anxious about the high expectations for the upcoming session, and wrestling with the immense suffocating weight of the secrets he carried. In that room, he was not the effortlessly cool Rudy Lewis, the star of the Drifters. He was Charles Rudolph Harrell, a deeply troubled and profoundly lonely man, 1,000 miles away from the Philadelphia church that had once been his sanctuary. He was a man at war with himself, his gospel soul in conflict with his secular life, his public persona at odds with his private truth. Perhaps he lay there thinking about the song he was to sing the next day, a song about a perfect, carefree love he felt he could never have himself. Perhaps he thought about the pressure to deliver another flawless performance, to once again pour every ounce of his emotion into the microphone for the world to consume, leaving nothing for himself. In that quiet room, surrounded by the sounds of a city still so foreign to his spirit, his demons were roaring their loudest. In a final desperate attempt to numb an unbearable pain, he allegedly used drugs one last time. The next morning, on May 21st, 1964, the other members of the Drifters began to gather, readying themselves for the studio session at Atlantic Records headquarters. There was a buzz of anticipation in the air. Under the Boardwalk felt like a sure thing. But as the minutes turned into an hour, their initial annoyance at their lead singer's tardiness began to curdle into genuine concern. Rudy was a professional. It wasn't like him to be so late for something this important. Frantic calls were made to his hotel. When there was no answer from his room, the hotel staff was asked to check on him. They opened the door and found a scene of quiet, devastating tragedy. Rudy Lewis was dead. He was found lying peacefully, having passed away in his sleep. The official cause of death was reported at the time as a probable drug overdose. No public autopsy record exists, and later accounts suggested other possible causes. Tragically, and in a heartbreakingly clear sign of how little the life of a troubled black artist was valued by the authorities at the time, no full autopsy was ever performed. The case was quickly and quietly closed, the story tidied up and swept under the rug with a minimum of fuss. He was just 27 years old. With his sudden quiet passing, he became one of the earliest, though often least remembered members of the infamous 27 Club, joining the tragic pantheon of brilliant artists whose lives were cut short at that fateful age. His death was not a rock and roll myth written in flames and headlines. It was a quiet human tragedy written in the silence of a locked hotel room, the inevitable final paragraph for a man crumbling under the weight of secrets no one should have to bear alone. The news of Rudy's death was a devastating blow, but in the unsentimental 1960s music industry, there was no time for grief. That same day, at Atlantic Studios, the returning Johnny Moore recorded the lead vocal for Under the Boardwalk. He also sang lead on the B-side, I Don't Want to Go On Without You, a track that served as an immediate and poignant tribute. The song, born from immediate tragedy, became the anthem of the summer of 1964 and one of the group's most enduring hits, a monumental success and an eternal bittersweet tribute to the man who should have sung it. Rudy Lewis was laid to rest at Mount Lawn Cemetery in Sharon Hill, Pennsylvania. His career had lasted less than 4 years, but in that brief time he left an indelible mark. His contribution was officially recognized in 1988 when he was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Drifters. The legacy of Rudy Lewis is complex. On one hand, he is the immortal voice on some of the most iconic songs of the 20th century, an artist who fused gospel passion with sophisticated pop and defined an era. But his story is also a quiet indictment, a testament to the invisible gravity that can crush an artist, and the profound human cost of a world that forces its most beautiful voices to sing from the shadows. Perhaps now when you hear his masterpiece, Up on the Roof, you might hear not just a song about escape, but the desperate prayer of a troubled soul searching for a peace he would never find.